For the past 35 years, Beth Am has observed the Martyrology service on Yom Kippur by remembering martyrs from different periods of Jewish history and bearing witness to their tragic stories. These were people who were murdered for one reason only: they were Jews. This Yom Kippur marks the 80th anniversary of the Babi Yar Massacre in Kiev. There will be commemorative ceremonies all over the world. Here at Beth Am, we will also commemorate this horrific event. We've spoken here on a number of occasions about the Jews who were martyred in Russia, a country where the roots of anti-Semitism are very deep. For years, Jews endured terrible abuses under the Tsars. They were confined to a region known as the Pale. They were not permitted to do work which competed with their neighbors. They were not allowed to own land. A strict quota system limited the number of aspiring young Jews to higher education and professions. Jewish boys as young as 12 years old were drafted into the military for terms as long as 25 years. But of all the abuses, the most terrifying were the pogroms. These were mob attacks on Jews, actually instigated by the Tsarist government. The attacks included killing, raping, looting, and destroying the homes and shops of the Jews. Under the Tsars, Jews were the scapegoat. They were blamed for all of Russia's problems. In 1903, a pogrom was instigated in the town of Kishinev by a rumor that the Jews had murdered a Russian child to obtain Christian blood for Passover. This blood libel, as it's called, this lie that Jews used Christian blood for matzahs, was part of a planned pogrom organized by officials from the government with local police and a hired mob. That pogrom unleashed 3 years of terror for the Jews. In November of 1905 alone, 25,000 Jews were murdered. These pogroms changed the course of Russian Jewish history. Jews feared for their lives, and huge numbers fled Russia. By 1910, 2,100,000 Russian Jews had come to America. Many here are their descendants. Unfortunately, whenever the Tsarist regime was threatened by an uprising, they would invent a blood libel to divert the mob's attention toward the Jews. In 1911, they framed a poor Jew in Kiev named Mendel Bayless, who was accused of murdering a Christian boy to use his blood for a Judaic ritual. The government prosecutors suppressed evidence the boy had actually been killed by a gang of thieves because he had witnessed one of their crimes. Bayless was jailed for 2 years as the prosecution tried to prove the Jew was guilty. It actually became an international issue. In the end, Bayless was acquitted thanks to a brilliant team of defense lawyers and the indignation of world opinion. The prosecution claimed that their defeat demonstrated just how powerful the Jewish world conspiracy was. That statement foreshadowed their next action. The Tsarists and secret police invented a false document they titled the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. It claimed to be the master plan of a Jewish conspiracy to control governments and the press worldwide. The historian John Klyer writes that Russian Judeophobia was now transformed from a simple primitive hatred of Jews into a modern myth of Jews as participants in a conspiracy to dominate the world. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion was the most potent piece of anti-Semitic literature ever written and a terrifying legacy from Russia. It proved deadly in the 1930s when it was embraced by Adolf Hitler. In her book, The Holocaust, Nora Levin writes that the protocols became the very center of Nazi ideology. Other authors writing about the Holocaust agree. In fact, author Leni Yahil goes even further. She writes that Hitler postulated that the Soviet Union was the first place where Jews had succeeded in their plot to take over the world. Hitler's assumption was that the communist state was ruled by Jews. Knowing what we do about the low status of Jews in Russia, It seems inconceivable that Hitler actually believed in the conspiracy myth of the protocols, but he did. A remarkable book on this period called The Black Book by Ilya Ehrenberg and Vasily Grossman states it clearly. Hitler viewed the Soviet government and communist ideology as an instrument utilized by Jews to control the world. On June 22nd, 1941, Germany invaded the Soviet Union. This invasion was a shocking surprise for the Soviets and to Stalin. Only 2 years earlier, he had signed a non-aggression pact with Hitler. The Nazi invasion was on a huge military scale, with the goal of ending the war in just a few months. Hitler decided that the Soviet Union would cease to exist by the end of 1941. Lenny Yehill states that Hitler was confident that this Bolshevik Jewish state, as he called it, with its Asiatic methods of government, would collapse as soon as his superior Aryan army invaded it. The tragic irony is that the Jews of the USSR were not the rulers. They were the weakest possible enemy the Germans could have chosen. They were a people without a land of their own, without a government or central authority. Jews were not a unified force. They were diverse in every way you can think of. Rich, poor, middle class, Orthodox, assimilated, Zionist, capitalist, etc. This delusion of a unified Jewish plot for the world domination proved deadly. Nora Levin quotes Erich Fundenbach, the Nazi officer in charge of the Russian front, in a testimony he gave at the trials after the war, when he acknowledged that the Nazis' belief in a powerful Jewish conspiracy was totally erroneous. He said the appalling fact was that they had no organization whatsoever. The Jewish people were taken completely by surprise. They did not know at all what to do. The greatest lie of anti-Semitism is that the Jews are conspiring to dominate the world and that they are so highly organized. In reality, they had no organization, not even an information service. If they had, these people could have been saved by the millions. Never before has a people gone as unsuspectingly to its disaster. Sadly, the Jews of the Soviet Union were totally unsuspecting. First of all, one must realize that they had no idea what the Nazis were doing to Jews in Germany and Poland. Soviet Jews lived in a country where information was tightly controlled by the government. They were totally unaware and unprepared for what would happen to them. The Germans' plan for the Soviet Jews was directed toward immediate extermination. They did not deport the Jews to concentration camps or labor camps, as had been done elsewhere. Instead, they planned to kill the Jews by shooting them in or near their hometowns. The invading German army was accompanied by mobile killing squads, the Einsatzgruppen. They operated behind the advancing German troops and carried out the plan. What happened in the Soviet Union is unlike anything that preceded it in world history. And no story is more tragic than the barbaric massacre of Jewish men, women, and children at the ravine on the outskirts of Kiev, known as Babi Yar. There, the Jews were shot by a unit of 150 German Einsatzgruppen, aided by several hundred Ukrainians. The killing rate, so precisely noted by the Germans, of 33,771 Jews in 2 days was unequaled, even by the death factories of Treblinka and Auschwitz. This happened on September 29th and 30th, 1941, which was Yom Kippur, 80 years ago. On Rosh Hashanah, an order was posted that Jews were to report to a specified corner of the outskirts of town near the old cemetery. They were to bring their personal belongings, valuables, and documents so that they could be sent for resettlement. This announcement did not seem to hint at any danger to the Jews as most of the population believed they were being transferred or resettled into another area. Many older Jews in Kiev remembered the Germans of World War I as relatively humane. The announcement also stated that any Jew who failed to report or any person who helped Jews to hide would be executed. The organizing killing squads had prepared their murders down to the last detail. Grossman writes in the Black Book, in the entire history of humanity, there has never been a crime comparable to this. Why would the Jews believe that they were being led to their deaths? So outrageous and unbelievable did the sudden murder of thousands of innocent people appear. Most of the Jewish population of Kiev dutifully assembled and slowly walked to the outskirts of the city, where there was a Jewish cemetery and a ravine known as Babi Yar. People in Kiev remember the endless columns of people moving along the pavement from early morning until late at night for 2 days. The Jews believed up to the last moment that they were being taken to a railroad station. The local population believed the story too. When the Jews arrived at the cemetery, they were led to Babi Yar. No one seemed worried. They heard nothing. A Ukrainian truck driver who was at the scene described what he saw. I watched what happened when the Jews, men, women, and children arrived. The Ukrainians led them past a number of different places where one after another, they had to remove their luggage, then their coats, shoes, and overgarments, and also undergarments. They had to leave their valuables in a designated place. There was a special pile for each article of clothing. It all happened very quickly. I don't think it was even a minute from the time each Jew took off his coat before he found himself standing there naked at the edge of the ravine. Out of the thousands of people who were machine gunned in those 2 days, miraculously, there were 29 survivors who have given written and spoken testimonies to Yad Vashem. Here's an excerpt from one of the testimonies. My name is Dina Mironova Wasserman. I grew up in a poor Jewish family and was raised under Soviet rule. I came to love a Russian boy, Nikolai Pronichev, married him and lived with him in love and happiness. In that way, I became Dina Mikhailovna Pronicheva. My passport identified me as a Russian. We had 2 children, a boy and a girl. And before the war, I was an actress of the Kiev Puppet Theater. My husband left for the front on the 2nd day of the war. I was left with our small children and a sick old mother. When I saw the posters on the city streets and read the order to the Jews, I took my little ones to my Russian mother-in-law and left them with her. Afterward, I took my sick mother, and following the order, she and I started out on the way to Babi Yar. Thousands of Jews were walking the same way. Russian husbands accompanied their Jewish wives. Russian wives accompanied their Jewish husbands. When we neared Babi Yar, we entered a gate, and we were ordered to hand over our documents and valuables and to take our clothes off. A German approached my mother and tore the gold ring off her finger. Only then did my mother say to me, Tenochka, you are a Russian, save yourself. Run to your little ones. But I couldn't run. All around were Germans with machine guns, Ukrainian policemen and fierce dogs. And how could I leave my mother? I hugged her. She pushed me away, crying, go quickly. I approached a table where an officer was sitting, showed him my passport and said quietly, I am Russian. He looked closely at the passport, but at that moment, a Ukrainian policeman ran up and said, don't believe her. She is a Yid. We know her. The German told me to wait and to stand aside. Each time a new group of men and women, elderly people and children were being forced to take off their clothes. I heard the terrible cries of panic-stricken people. I saw all this, but in no way could I understand how people were killing other human beings only because they were Jews. And then I understood. The Germans were not human beings, but beasts. The German brought me to his superior and gave him my passport, saying, "This woman says she's a Russian, but a policeman knows that she is a Yid." The superior took the passport, examined it for a long time, and said, "Dina is not a Russian name. You are a Yid. Take her away." The policeman ordered me to strip and push me to the precipice, where another group of people awaited their fate. But before the shots resounded, apparently out of fear, I fell into the pit. I fell on the bodies of those already murdered, and then people started to fall on top of me. I pretended to be dead. The shooting continued and people kept falling. I pushed the bodies off of me, afraid of being buried alive. I did so in a way that would not attract the attention of the policeman. Suddenly, all became quiet. It was getting dark. Germans with machine guns walked around, finishing off the wounded. Then I felt we were being covered with earth. I closed my eyes so that the soil would not get into them. And when it became dark and silence, I opened my eyes and threw the sand off me, and making sure that no one was close by. There were thousands of dead bodies. I was overcome with terror. I started crawling quietly toward the high hills surrounding the pit and slowly climbed out. Only after making sure that I was far away from that terrible place did I allow myself to walk upright to a hut in the darkness. Dina Pronocheva and the other survivors able to crawl out did find refuge and were miraculously saved by brave Ukrainians who risked their own lives to help them. The German military progressed very quickly in the first few months, which enabled the accompanying Einsatzgruppen to work swiftly and well, moving systematically from town to town, assembling the Jews and conveying them outside the towns and villages to forests, trenches, or natural pits where they were shot. The idea was to trap the Jews suddenly, without warning, and without a chance of escaping. The procedure was followed in town after town. Jewish communities would completely disappear. It's unbelievable to read about it. In hundreds of villages, towns, and cities, Jewish communities vanished in an instant of time. The Einsatzgruppen aimed at systematic and businesslike activity, but the reality of the situation was very different. And every kind of savagery of which human beings seemed to be capable was practiced, often directed at the children. The Einsatzgruppen had orders not to waste bullets on children, so they threw them into the pit to be buried alive. I read the testimony at the Nuremberg trials of Otto Olendorf, who commanded one of the Einsatzgruppen. He was specifically questioned about the killing of children. First, he was asked how many men, women, and children he had killed in the year of his command. And without hesitation, he replied, 90,000. And for what reason were the children massacred? He answered, the order was that the Jewish population should be totally exterminated. The Jews posed a continuous danger to the German occupation troops. Will you explain to the tribunal what conceivable threat to the security of the Wehrmacht a child constituted? Olendorf seemed astonished that the prosecutor would linger on the question and said, I did not have to determine the danger. The order said that all Jews, including children, were a danger. The prosecutor did not relent. Will you agree that there was absolutely no basis for killing children but genocide? Olendorf, with complete self-control, replied, I believe that it is very simple to explain. The children would grow up, and surely being the children of parents who had been killed would constitute a danger no smaller than that of the parents. No one can accurately describe what the Jews were suffering. They were in this nightmare of planned murder that neither they nor the majority of modern humanity could have conceived possible. Resistance wasn't possible because of the speed with which the mass murders took place and the secrecy of purpose. And later, when the terrible truth reached some ghettos, the Jews didn't believe what they heard. They rejected it as a horrible rumor. However, many Jews fled to the forests, which became places of refuge for entire Jewish families running for their lives. And there were courageous uprisings within the ghettos. The town of Bialystok, which was the scene of some of the worst pogroms in 1905, was now in 1941 being cleansed of Jews by the Nazis. In the Bialystok ghetto, the Jewish resistance posted this proclamation: "We have nothing to lose. Let us not behave like sheep going to slaughter, even if we are too weak to defend ourselves. We are strong enough to defend our Jewish honor and human dignity. Do not go freely to your death. Make your enemy pay with blood for blood, with death for death." 500 Jewish men and women resistance fighters in Bialystok held out against the Germans for 5 days until they were finally crushed. Hitler had unleashed the murderous impulses of his men and goaded them to hate and kill Jews without let up. It soon became impossible to conceal killing sites from witnesses, many of whom were shocked at what they saw. A German troop commander in Zhytomyr wrote in an official report to his superiors that what he saw was so brutally base that those who approached unprepared were shaken and nauseated. Policemen were standing around in blood-stained uniforms. Soldiers congregated in groups, some of them in bathing shorts. Civilians were watching with their wives and children. As a military man, I have seen many unpleasant things, but I never saw anything like this before. By early winter, 1941, details had filtered through to the West about the massacres. Photographs had leaked out and reached the US and England. Martin Gilbert, in his book on the Holocaust, writes about Winston Churchill's response to the news of the massacres. Churchill wrote a message to the Jewish Chronicle, giving public recognition to the Jewish suffering. He wrote, "None has suffered more cruelly than the Jews. The Jew bore the brunt of the Nazis' first onslaught upon the citadels of freedom and human dignity. He has borne and continues to bear a burden that might have seemed to be beyond endurance. Assuredly, in the day of victory, the Jew's sufferings and his part in the struggle will not be forgotten." Unfortunately, that did not happen in the Soviet Union. Quite the opposite. Stalin knew about the massacres and did nothing. There is substantial evidence that he forbade any public announcement of the killings of Jews. At no time before, during, or after the war did the Soviet government acknowledge the German killings of Jews, nor did the government protect or help them. By the war's end, approximately 2 million Jews living under Soviet rule had been murdered by the Einsatzgruppen. This is 1/3 of all of the Jews in the Holocaust. In 1947, a publication on the mass killings of Jews was banned. Jews were forbidden to commemorate victims by putting up memorial tablets or monuments. It's ironic. Only 5 years earlier, in 1942, the Soviet government wanted and needed Jews. In fact, they organized a Jewish anti-fascist committee to enlist wartime support from the Jews in the United States and Britain. Stalin invited Jewish writers and artists to be on the committee and selected Solomon Nichols, the much admired director of the Moscow Yiddish State Theater, to be the chairman. Now in 1948, Stalin had the secret police murder Nichols. In a so-called accident, he was run over by a truck. Nichols' murder was followed by arrests of hundreds of Jewish intellectuals, In this police state atmosphere, non-Jewish writers, poets, and musicians also suffered from repression and feared for their lives. They too could be arrested in the middle of the night and sent away to be murdered because of some perceived slight to the state. And so it took enormous courage for a young poet named Yevgeny Yevtushenko to take on the subject of Jewish suffering and Russian anti-Semitism in a poem in which he expressed his anguish over the dreadful massacre at Babi Yar, for which there was no monument or memorial. I learned about Babi Yar through my profession as a music narrator with symphony orchestras. Some years ago, I came across a CD of a symphony by Dmitri Shostakovich with narration, his symphony number 13, which is subtitled Babi Yar. Before the first movement of the symphony, a male narrator recited in Russian the poem Babi Yar by Yevtushenko. In reading the translation of the poem and the program notes, I learned the tragic story behind the poem. Some here may remember that in 2000, Yuri Temirkanov, then the music director of the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, performed this symphony by Shostakovich with the poet Yevtushenko himself reciting the poem. It was a riveting performance and an unforgettable experience for me as a music lover, but even more so as a Jew. Here are just a few lines from the poem. There's no memorial above Babi Yar. The deep ravine is like a coarse tombstone. The trees look threatening, as though in judgment. Here, everything silently screams. And bearing my head, I become a long, soundless scream above the thousands and thousands buried here. No part of me can ever forget this. There is no Jewish blood in my blood, but I feel the loathsome hatred of all anti-Semites as though I were a Jew. And that is why I am a true Russian. The poem is a strong indictment of Soviet anti-Semitism, and it caused a sensation. Shostakovich was also not Jewish, but he had for years been very disturbed by his country's anti-Semitism. He was deeply anguished by the news of the murder of his old friend, Solomon Michels. He told a colleague, "It would be good if Jews could live peacefully and happily in Russia, where they were born. We must never forget the dangers of anti-Semitism and keep reminding others of it, because the infection is still alive, and who knows if it will ever disappear." That's why I was overjoyed when I read Yevtushenko's Babi Yar. It took the poem to make people aware of it. They tried to destroy the memory of Babi Yar, first the Germans and then the Soviet government. But after Yevtushenko's poem, it became clear that it would never be forgotten. That is the power of art. In 1991, on the 50th anniversary of the massacre, local Jews raised funds to erect a metal sculpture of a menorah, but it was often abused by locals, and for years the site was derelict and strewn with trash. But only a few days from now, the Ukraine will have a ceremony to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the Babi Yar Massacre. President Volodymyr Zelensky, the first Jewish leader of Ukraine, has formally invited global and Jewish leaders, Holocaust survivors, Ukrainians honored by Yad Vashem for saving Jews, as well as Holocaust educators and historians. At the ceremony, 2 new memorials will be unveiled. Natan Sharansky, the Jewish activist and chair of the board of the Babi Yar Memorial Center, has said, "The 80th anniversary of this dreadful massacre is the ideal opportunity to right an historic wrong for the sake of Ukraine, the Jewish people, and indeed the world. It is a chance to tell the stories of those murdered here, to honor their memories and to learn the lesson of this terrible tragedy. This has been a deeply sorrowful journey in our martyrology today. Our eyes have been opened to even more horrific events than we already knew. The nightmarish invasion of Hitler's mobile killing units martyred 2 million innocent Jews in the Soviet Union. That number is so staggering that it's hard to realize that it's made up of individuals like ourselves, our families, our friends. It's a painful story to hear and to tell. Natan Sharansky's words reminded me of Elie Wiesel's speech at the opening of the U.S. Holocaust Museum, when he said, "This is a great day," he said, "for it symbolizes our victory over forgetfulness, thus saving the victims from a second death." Today, we respectfully remember.